There we go. I think everything is all good. We're all connected on Facebook, YouTube and Rumble from what I can see. So hello, good evening and welcome to another stream by Freedom Media. And remember, don't just like it, share it as well, because it's the only way that the other side can get out, because mainstream media won't tell you all the bits that we're about to show you. If by now you haven't heard at least one of the rumours of the significant development of the Perth Mint, whilst I don't blame you, because people have switched off mainstream media for many years now, for the past 3 years. However, this is perhaps one story that you really should have a look at. Last Monday, ABC Four Corners ran a story by Angus Grigg called Tainted Gold. And I really encourage you to take the time to watch the full 44 minutes of his story, after this stream, of course, as it will lay out all the facts that makes this scandal behind what I'll now dub as Perth Mint Gate. On Tuesday, myself and the crew from Freedom Media WA were at WA Parliament as we had a pre-arranged interview with the Honourable Nick Goren, MLC, and that stream is already posted, and whilst submissions have closed for the review into the WA management of the COVID pandemic for the last 2 years, it's still worth having a listen to what Nick Goren has to say. But getting back to what this stream is about, whilst we were waiting for that interview, we saw a media pack assembled, so we seized the opportunity as a matter of public interest to jump in. Here's a brief look. The WA Nationals leader, we have Mr. Shane Love, just holding a press conference.
I need to get to the bottom of what has occurred. First, to get information about anything they've got concerns about.
Short and sharp.
Can I just ask, the Premier last Monday held a press conference at the front where he said that the first... So keep watching to hear the question in full and the reply from Mr. Shane Love. And to correct the record, is the national leaders, but he's also the WA opposition leader. So for the time now, and sometime particularly in the last couple of weeks, Shane Love has been investigating the government's management of the Perth Mint. And more recently, he's been pushing hard for a royal commission into the Perth Mint, ramping up since the airing of the Four Corners Tainted Gold story aired last Monday, March the 6th. The press conference that you just saw was about an hour before the afternoon session in WA Upper House, where Shane Love was announcing to mainstream media that he would be tabling a motion in a later sitting for a Royal Commission into the Perth Mint Gate, where Shane Love mentioned his call for the Royal Commission in questions without notice. As I said, that was about an hour later. And Premier Mark McGowan, in response to that, said that it's a storm in an F&T cup. Let's have a look.
Premier, as the Minister responsible for Gold Corporation at the time the doping took place, do you take responsibility for the controversy that has now erupted?
Premier? Madam Speaker, as I advised you, my knowledge of the issues in question. Apparently they came to the attention of the board, of the administration, I think in September 2021. The board was informed shortly thereafter, in October 2021, and the issue was rectified. But I was, to the best of my knowledge, and certainly the advice I have and the full review of any of the briefing notes and so forth, I was not informed of the matters.
Madam Speaker.
The member for Darling Range.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is on the I refer to the McGowan Labor government's ongoing campaign to diversify the West Australian economy, including in the defence sector. So
why is Shane Love pushing hard for a Royal Commission into Perth Mint Gate? This is Shane Love, again, last Monday eve, on the eve of the Four Corners Tainted Gold story that was aired by the ABC. Let's have a look.
I'm calling for there to be a Royal Commission held into the goings-on at Perth Mint.
Why? Because the Perth Mint supplies gold, silver and platinum items for sale, as well as offering refining services for precious metals. The Perth Mint chairman is ex-Rio Tinto boss Sam Walsh, who has a board of directors reporting to him, but the Perth Mint is owned by the WA government. Under Section 22 of the Gold in Corporations Act, all of the Mint's operations are guaranteed by the Treasurer, and that's Mark McGowan, who took on responsibility for the portfolio from March 8, 2018 to March 2021. What's interesting here, since things have started looking scandalous on this matter, in recent press conferences, Mark McGowan said he handed the portfolio responsibility to Mines Minister Bill Johnson, who, with the golden convenience in terms of timing, is currently overseas in Canada and isn't making himself available to comment on the Perth Mint gate. Something Shane Love has also been making a point on as well. Let's have a look at that.
Now, Bill's overseas, but hey, there are telephones. I'm sure if someone rang him up, he could make comment.
This is far from the quote-unquote Premier Mark McGowan storm in an F&T cup. And if those living in WA as taxpayers, you are potentially on the hook for millions and millions of dollars lost of the public purse. Mainstream media, in particular Channels 7, 9 and 10, have focused their controlled news stories on a bikie who bought $27,000 worth of gold from the Perth Mint with no background checks apart from showing his driver's licence. There's no point me telling you his name, as in the scheme of things, it's a red herring in terms of the depth of this scandal. The bikie simply walked into the Perth Mint and complied with exactly all the requirements the Perth Mint asked of him when he purchased the gold. Premier Mark McGowan, via mainstream media, and to be fair in this case, it doesn't include the ABC, as James Carmody from ABC here Perth has been pressing Mark McGowan on this for the past week. Let's have a listen.
Why is it that yourself, you said, and the public and taxpayers only became aware of this on Monday?
The minister was advised last year. It was an operational matter that was resolved with the purchases of the gold at the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So the matter was resolved.
You weren't told?
No, I wasn't. I said that before.
And later that day in Parliament, let's have a look at that.
Do you take responsibility for the controversy that has now erupted?
I was not informed of the matters.
What you need to remember here, and as I've mentioned at the head of the stream, at law, it's the Treasurer. And again, that's Mark McGowan where the buck stops, or in this case, the gold standard of accountability. It most definitely rests with Premier Mark McGowan. I can tell you at the press conference that we jumped in on, it went for about 20 minutes, and not one question from the strongly linked McGowan and media mogul of 7 Media Group owner Kerry Stokes came from political reporter Jeff Parry, directly calling out Premier McGowan's secrecy on Perth Mint Gate. For all the pre-recording and questions asked of Shane Love at that press conference, this is all that Channel 7 aired of his comments that night.
And the Premier's answer to a call for a Royal Commission was also no.
I think the need for this will grow. If it's rejected in the first instance by the government, we will keep calling for it.
There are a number of issues in Perth Mint Gate. One is gold doping. And in case you haven't heard about it, here's Mark McGowan trying to explain all about gold doping. Let's have a look.
Now, in relation to the issues here, as I outlined to the House today, I just want to go through each of the issues. As far as I can tell, there are 3 major issues.
Did you notice that Mark McGowan first said in relation to the issues that there was 3 as far as he knew, and then he circled back and then he called these issues major issues. Let's just have a close listen to that.
Now, in relation to the issues here, as I outlined to the House today, I just want to go through each of the issues. As far as I can tell, there are 3 major issues.
As far as he can tell, 3 major issues. Now back to Mark McGowan explaining gold doping in Parliament. And here is Mark McGowan in Parliament last week.
One is the alloying of the gold. Now the alloying of the gold, which took place for some period of time, was brought to attention of the administration of the, sorry, I'll put it this way. The gold has always been alloyed, always. That has never changed. What changed was the component of silver versus copper and lead for gold sold to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So what occurred was the component of gold that was sold was 99.992% gold. The remaining 0.008 of a gold bar, of that, the majority was silver, as opposed to lead and copper. Now, the Shanghai Gold Exchange likes half of that amount to be silver and the other half to be copper and lead. Now, it's a unique requirement of the Shanghai Gold Exchange that they like that. Now, the gold that is sold there's many tonnes sold to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. There's huge appetite in China for West Australian gold, and that gold is, I'm advised, regularly used. It's used in jewellery and teeth and industrial purposes and all sorts of applications across industry. And as you can imagine, a country of 1.4 billion people, there's huge demand for those sorts of things. So the gold is regularly used.
And as I can see from your comments coming in, lots of ums, ahs. He doesn't look comfortable. He doesn't sound comfortable. So it's up to you to draw your conclusion as to what you think. And here is the Perth Mint CEO answering questions on the same gold doping last Tuesday. Let's have a look.
The first that the WA public have learnt of it is last night in Four Corners. Is that acceptable?
All I can say is that what's not acceptable is that we sent gold offshore to a customer which exceeded a specification.
What he really means is that it did not meet contractual arrangements and obligations. So that's a breach of contract. The WA Premier Mark McGowan led and WA owned Perth Mint started gold doping its gold back in 2018. And they did that as a cost-cutting exercise. The Perth Mint sold up to $9 billion worth of gold, sold under strict contract arrangements to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And it was discovered by the Shanghai Gold Exchange that some bars had been diluted. It didn't meet their contract arrangements. And what makes this scandalous is when the Perth Mint was caught out not meeting the contractual arrangements, according to the Four Corners Tainted Gold story, the Perth Mint allegedly tried to cover this up because they were concerned that it would affect the Perth Mint's reputation. They had no concern whatsoever for the WA public taxpayer and the fact that it would be the WA people that end up footing this bill if it goes pear-shaped. A reputation that last financial year, Australia's biggest gold refinery, the Perth Mint, turned over almost $22 billion of gold. And I'll add here that the doping program introduced in 2018 had an expected cost saving of about $620,000 a year, an absolute tiny fraction of the Perth Mint's turnover, but a massive, massive risk to West Australians. But the gold doping isn't the real scandal here. It's the Perth Mint's potential breach of federal anti-money laundering laws, which includes the buying and selling of gold. And to set the scene here, I'm going to play an edited down short part of the key points of the Four Corners Tainted Gold story. But as I said at the start of the stream, it really is still worth your while watching the full story because it's concerning, to say the very least. Let's have a look.
In August last year, the nation's financial crime regulator AUSTRAC announced it was investigating the Perth Mint's compliance with money laundering and counter-terrorism financing laws. So I'm on my way to speak to former federal police officer John Chevis to see what he can tell me. He's advised foreign governments and the United Nations on how to combat money laundering. And he was one of the first people to voice concerns about the Perth Mint. Chevis's digging led him to the Mediterranean tax haven of Cyprus. The country's largest bank is the notorious Bank of Cyprus. It's an institution with documented links to money laundering. Despite this reputation, Bank of Cyprus customers were able to buy and store their gold in the Perth Mint's vault.
And what does it tell you about the Perth Mint?
Well, it tells us the Perth Mint has perhaps really not understood the business that it's playing in when it comes to dealing with people offshore and dealing with the types of money laundering risks that surround its business.
The Four Corners team has been digging into a trove of confidential documents that reveal the extent of what was really going on inside the Perth Mint.
Okay, look, let's have a look at this one. They've identified the Bank of Cyprus as a customer.
And for every individual, well, including the Bank of Cyprus, there's no customer check, no evidence that they were screened as to whether they're a politically exposed person.
What we know about the history of these banks, that's a problem. I mean, if you don't know who the ultimate owners of these sort of accounts are.
And they're admitting it though. But
yeah.
I think the point is here, looking at this is the Perth Mint admitting they haven't screened any of these people.
No, they relied on the Bank of Cyprus to do that for them.
Oh, so hang on,
What we find is that the Perth Mint appears to have breached federal anti-money laundering laws.
Yeah, and I think if you look at point 2 here, though, it's also that they need to know what their customer's source of what funds is,
yeah,
right?
Okay.
What their source of wealth is, and they haven't. It looks like they haven't checked that.
Well, that's a big
either.
one. That's a really big one. And so I guess that exposes them to the risk of potentially holding corrupt funds on behalf of...
We already knew it was happening with their domestic client base, and now we know it was happening internationally as well.
Yes, exactly. Is what you're saying is that...
We asked John Chevis about what we'd found.
If, as you're telling me, they didn't do those checks, then they are left very exposed. And they've left the government of West Australia and the taxpayers of Western Australia exposed similarly.
The Perth Mint's appetite for risk and dealing with banks in tax havens didn't end with Cyprus. One of its former clients, based in Puerto Rico, is being investigated by international tax authorities on suspicion of facilitating tax evasion and money laundering. It's the Euro-Pacific Bank, and it had a relationship with the Perth Mint. Euro-Pacific Bank was firmly in the sights of Australian and international law enforcement agencies. And they labelled the bank's clients a high threat and said it was attractive for serious and organised crime groups. Groups that had access to the Perth Mint's gold.
As we continued to dig into this story, we came across some information that stunned us. I'm not allowed to show you what it is, but it told us at one point the Perth Mint was holding $17 million on behalf of Euro-Pacific.
We now know authorities believe the Perth Mint was likely used by money launderers and fraudsters to move illicit funds around the world. In July last year, Euro-Pacific was shut down by authorities in Puerto Rico for not holding enough capital. Its clients are under investigation in at least 5 countries, including Australia.
Now, opposition leader Shane Love has had his finger on the pulse for some time now in relation to this. And let's take a look further again with the Four Corners Tainted Gold, because you can see the input that he has had.
The document trail led us even further into the internal failings of the Mint and how these came about. Our research team was given access to a Freedom of Information request granted last year to the WA opposition.
At the beginning, we didn't really know why certain parts were significant.
The FOI related to a debacle around the Perth Mint's outdated software system, which managed its customer records.
It seemed that the software rollout, like the bungled software rollout, was a way bigger issue than we'd realised.
And why is the software significant? What's the issue here?
So this is a document this is a briefing note that was sent to the board in March 2021, and this is about the new software.
What's it sort of tell us here?
Point 4.
Okay.
There is no single view of a customer. They're spread over multiple systems, making AML, CTF, so anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism finance management, more difficult than it would otherwise be the case.
So this is them admitting in black and white that they have a really big problem with their anti-money laundering.
That's right. It was an out-of-date program. It was more than 15 years old. They had no single view of a customer, which kind of explains why they lost track of who they were dealing with.
So for Premier Mark McGowan to say that this is a storm in an effing teacup, it further highlights his arrogance to West Australian people. It certainly fails to meet his much touted and definitely far from delivered gold standard in transparency, which the West Australian people deserve. Mark McGowan promised it, Mark McGowan campaigned on it, and this broken political promise you should be very concerned about, because everything that should hold Mark McGowan's government to account isn't, as he is using his numbers in both the upper and lower house to dispense with proper parliamentary debate, as well as legislative provisions to keep disclosure wrapped up in secrecy. When the West Australian taxpayer is on the hook, regardless of your politics, this isn't good. Now, as to how much we're on the hook for, well, I really don't know, but I'm just going to turn back to one last piece of the Four Corners Tainted Gold program, and you can watch what one financial intelligence expert, Mr. Nathan Lynch, what he thinks about the matter.
The AUSTRAC investigation has left the Perth Mint potentially facing criminal charges and billions of dollars in fines. We've learned that perhaps the most serious breach was its failure to report even a single international fund transfer to AUSTRAC for more than a decade. This is one of its most important obligations under the law. Just one of these breaches carries a potential fine of $21 million, and I've been told the Perth Mint did this more than 5,000 times.
It's very unprecedented for major Australian organisations to get caught out on the criminal aspects of the anti-money laundering regime. So in the past, there have been huge breaches of the civil provisions, but when it comes to failing to register as a remitter, which is a potential criminal offence, that is completely unprecedented.
The Perth Mint told Four Corners the matter is complex and it's obtaining specialist legal advice.
Ultimately, the bill for the remediation work will be borne by taxpayers. These types of problems commonly run into tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of the cost of bringing things up to a standard that AUSTRAC is happy with, and also the associated fines and penalties. So, it's a serious thing to get wrong.
Now, before I play my question of what I asked WA Opposition Leader Shane Love and his reply in full, I just want to highlight this last insight from Four Corners program, something which Premier Mark McGowan is becoming more and more infamous for, and we have seen this recently here in WA with the draconian legislation around his new state of emergency controls. And that's the law. It is draconian and it's shrouded in secrecy. McGowan's way or no way. And when it comes to the Perth Mint, it's no different. Let's just have a look at that.
Sitting behind the Perth Mint is an entity known as the Gold Corporation. It has its own Act of Parliament in WA, a 35-year-old piece of legislation.
The Gold Corporation Act is the legislation that really governs the way in which the West Australian Perth Mint operates. It sets out the standards and expectations of how the Mint should conduct its business and what governance requirements exist. The Gold Corporation Act is just not fit for purpose. There are no references whatsoever to even the most basic principles of good governance, such as integrity, transparency and accountability, which of course you would expect for a sector such as gold.
Embedded within the Act are draconian secrecy provisions. It even allows the Perth Mint to detain and search its own staff. For current and former employees, there's the threat of hefty fines and up to 5 years jail if they disclose information about the Mint.
When you have an Act that seems to prioritise secrecy, that really creates a chilling effect for employees. It effectively silences them from speaking out. It acts as a gag order, and that means then that it's really, really challenging for a potential whistleblower who may have witnessed or have a reasonable suspicion that there's been wrongdoing or misconduct.
So the issues surrounding Perth Mint Gate is shaping up to be WA's biggest scandal in history, way bigger than WA Inc. And all this falls solely on Mark McGowan's watch. Sure, there may be some history with this that dates back in time and before his time, which should make it an even more reason why the call by the opposition leader Shane Love for the Royal Commission really should get up, because we need to have a good look at this. It took some 20 odd years before West Australians received a courtesy payment, if you like, from McGowan just before the election on a payout on the WA Inc. And who knows how much the WA taxpayers are going to, that this is going to cost them. But the big question here is, when did Mark McGowan know this was going to be a major issue? His words, as he described it in Parliament last week. Because it's certainly not a question, did he know? It's a question, when did he know? Premier Mark McGowan most certainly did know, and knows way more than his ducking and diving he's done in the last week. And to substantiate this claim, consider this.
Short and sharp.
Can I just ask, the Premier last Monday held a press conference at the front where he said that the first he'd heard of the Perth Mint scandal was after the airing of the Four Corners article. How creditable do you find that when the Four Corners reporter was here 5 weeks earlier asking him those very questions on the Perth Mint?
Well, that's a very good question indeed. And one would have thought that if the reporter had been asking questions, that he would have made some inquiry as to why he was asking those questions. And it seems to me that that's a pattern that we've seen emerge, that what you would think would trigger a response, like I would ask a parliamentary question about a matter, it didn't seem to elicit any sort of inquiries from either the Premier or the Minister into the circumstances around that question.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
For Mark McGowan to say that he first heard about the issues regarding Perth Mint was Tuesday morning last week after the airing of Four Corners' story Tainted Gold on Monday night, he would need to convince me that he saw no reason for himself or any of his staffers to at least have war-gamed what Angus Grigg from Four Corners was digging up when he confronted the Premier about 5 weeks ago and questioned him on this. But don't take my word for it. Have a look at the press conference 5 weeks ago, the questions that Angus Grigg was asking Mark McGowan, and you be the judge.
Premier McGowan refused our request for an interview.
Right, good morning everyone, you all good?
So I came to see him in Perth.
Premier, Angus Grigg from Four Corners, can I ask you about...
Can I just finish with local issues before I deal with that? I don't know, you go for it.
He was in no hurry to answer my questions.
Premier, can I ask you about...
No mate, just wait.
Premier...
We are going... Mate, please. You're right.
Premier, can I ask you about...
Is everyone else finished with all their issues?
Sorry, so I think it's related.
We're West Australians we're dealing with here.
So we don't get a question?
I didn't say that.
At the end of the press conference, he finally relented.
Premier Angus Grigg from Four Corners, can I ask you about the Perth Mint? Do you think it's appropriate that the Perth Mint is selling gold to underworld figures? And what responsibility for that do you take, given it was in your portfolio for many years?
What I understand is this. There's been a change of senior management at the Perth Mint over the course of the last couple of years. There is an audit being undertaken. The Mint is complying with the processes under the audit. And the Mint itself is investigating heavily in anti-criminal behaviour, if you like, and compliance measures. So upgrading its IT systems, overhauling its customer data processes and its business processes. So that is something the Mint is currently engaged in.
So do you think it's appropriate that criminals have been able to buy gold at the Perth Mint?
I don't know what you're referring to, but I do know is the Mint is going through a whole range of measures to improve its practices.
Do you think it's appropriate that the Perth Mint, a WA government-owned organisation, is dealing with high-risk clients who are now being investigated for money laundering?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Can I ask you one more question? One more question, Premier, one more question.
Mark McGowan was the responsible minister for a period of time when these events were playing out.
I can see your questions coming in. It's clearly the display and the arrogance of Premier Mark McGowan there to answer a question in the background. So that's Paul Papalieri, that's the Minister for Police standing in the background. But what do you think? Do you think that Mark McGowan knew about the scandal with the Perth Mint before the airing of the Four Corners Tainted Gold story? And do you think that he certainly knows way more because as Treasurer, he really should be briefed on this? And do you think that there really does need to be a Royal Commission to get to the bottom of this? So, as always, I do say that, thank you for those that have watched to the end, and thank you for those for your many comments coming through. I can see and try not to laugh with the reference there, little tubby. Keep the comments coming. And remember, as I said at the start of the stream, it's not enough just to like the stream. The only way that information can get around, of this nature is to continue sharing this. We're trying to push out a message by mainstream media. You've just seen what they do at a press conference. They certainly don't want to ask any questions that pin down Mark McGowan directly. So that, and we would love to get to more press conferences. But on the two applications that we've applied to WA Parliament, which are approved by Premier Mark McGowan himself, he's knocked them back twice. So I'm Lindsay from Freedom Media. Until the next stream, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Brought to you by Freedom Media WA, where journalism should never be a government narrative.